On the morning of August 17, 1943, Winston Churchill received the kind of news no statesman could fully control. Messina had fallen, but not to the man Britain expected. Not to Bernard Montgomery, the celebrated victor of El Alamein. Not to the British Eighth Army, whose road to the city had been treated as the main road of the campaign. Messina had been entered first by George S. Patton, an American general who was supposed to guard a flank, had just taken the prize at the end of Churchill's own Mediterranean strategy, and in that single fact the Sicily campaign changed shape. It was no longer only a battle against the Axis. It had become something more dangerous inside the Allied camp itself, a test of who would define victory: Britain, with its old imperial confidence, or America, with an army still learning how much power it really had. By 1943, the Mediterranean was not just a theater of war. It was Churchill's great argument. He believed Axis Europe could be cracked from the south. Sicily would fall first. Mussolini would be shaken loose. The sea lanes would open. Italy would become the road into the continent. To Churchill, this was not a secondary campaign. It was the soft underbelly strategy made flesh, and it carried a second meaning that was never written quite so plainly. British strategy would lead. British commanders would shine. America would help carry the weight, but Britain would show the way. General George C. Marshall and the American planners had never loved the idea. Their instinct was blunt and direct. Cross the Channel, land in France, drive toward Germany. But at Casablanca in January 1943, Churchill's argument prevailed. Operation Husky was approved. It would be the largest amphibious landing ever attempted up to that point, involving thousands of ships and landing craft spread across the Mediterranean and beyond. 7 Allied divisions would hit Sicily at once. The island would be taken from the south and east, and at the far northeastern tip sat the real trophy, Messina, a port city only about 2 miles from the Italian mainland, a doorway, a headline, a finish line, and the command structure revealed the political story behind the military one. General Harold Alexander, a British officer, commanded the 15th Army Group. Montgomery's British 8th Army received the prestigious eastern drive up the coast. Patton's U.S. 7th Army landed to the west, assigned mainly to protect Montgomery's left flank. That was the script. Montgomery advances. Patton supports. Britain leads. America learns. But Patton was not built to be background scenery in another man's campaign. On July 10, 1943, the Sicily landings began. American troops came ashore near Gela on the southern coast. Almost immediately, the beachhead was tested. German armor from the Hermann Goering Division pushed toward the Americans faster than expected. Around Piano Lupo, tanks and infantry drove into the confusion of the landing zone. The Americans held because they had to. Infantrymen clung to positions under pressure. Naval guns fired close support from offshore. The beachhead survived the first shock, but it was not clean. It was not easy. And nobody watching those first hours could say the U.S. Army had already mastered the Mediterranean War. To the east, Montgomery moved with confidence at first. Syracuse fell quickly. The British advance looked orderly, seasoned, inevitable. Then Sicily began to fight back. The landscape around Mount Etna was a defensive nightmare. Lava rock, broken ridges, narrow roads, and German positions dug into high ground turned speed into exhaustion. Around Catania, German paratroopers and anti-aircraft guns used in a ground roll tore at British armor and slowed Montgomery's drive to a crawl. The main road was no longer the fast road, and that mattered because Patton saw what others did not want him to see. The western flank was not a dead end. It was an opening. On July 13th, Omar Bradley's Second Corps was close to the Vizini-Caltagirone Road, a crucial east-west route through the center of Sicily. Holding that road would give American forces room to move toward the interior, then toward the north, then toward Messina. Then the order came down. Montgomery needed the road. Bradley would have to shift west. To Bradley, it felt like the Americans were being pushed aside just when the campaign opened. To Patton, it confirmed something colder. If the British command wanted his army reduced to a supporting role, he would use the role against them. He would turn the flank into a race course. Patton did not announce rebellion. He did not tear up the Allied plan in public. He did something more dangerous. He obeyed the order, then made the order serve a different purpose. He drove west toward Palermo. On paper, Palermo was not the main objective. In practice, it became Patton's pivot. His columns moved with a speed that startled Allied headquarters. By July 22nd, Palermo had fallen. Tens of thousands of Axis prisoners were taken. The city gave Patton a port, a supply base, a propaganda triumph, and most importantly, a new line of movement. Now the Americans could turn east along Sicily's northern coast. Messina was no longer only Montgomery's destination. It was Patton's too. And this is where the campaign inside the campaign became impossible to hide. Patton's own directive made the meaning plain. This was a horse race. The prestige of the U.S. Army was at stake. Messina had to be taken before the British. That one sentence cut through every polite Allied formula. This was no longer only about clearing Sicily. It was about proving that America was not a junior partner. Bradley's Second Corps drove north, then east along Highway 120. Other American forces pressed along the coastal Highway 113. Two American lines began moving toward the same city through brutal terrain, each trying to outpace not only the Germans, but Montgomery's slow advance from the east. But the Germans were not collapsing in panic. They were withdrawing with discipline. General Hans Valentin Hube, commanding the 14th Panzer Corps, understood the island better than the Allies wanted to admit. He used hills, towns, demolitions, roadblocks, and river crossings to slow the Americans just long enough to save his force. At Troina, from July 31st to August 6th, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division fought through one of the hardest battles of the Sicilian campaign. The Germans held ridges with stubborn skill. Artillery, infantry, and air power had to be coordinated day after day to break the position. This was the contradiction at the heart of Patton's dash. He was racing for a city, but the enemy was racing for a ferry line. Across the Strait of Messina, German engineers were moving men, vehicles, artillery, and equipment to the Italian mainland. The water was narrow, only about 2 miles at its tightest point, but it was shielded by heavy anti-aircraft defenses and organized with cold efficiency. The Allies owned the larger battle, but they did not close the door. So the question underneath the race becomes uncomfortable. What does it mean to win Messina if the German army gets away? Patton did not pause for that question. On August 8th, he flew forward to push his divisional commanders harder. Lucian Truscott's 3rd Infantry Division was driving along the coast. Known for the hard marching pace Truscott had drilled into his men, Patton wanted no slack, no hesitation, no drift. Speed was not a preference anymore. It was the whole campaign. To break past German positions anchored in the mountains, Patton authorized amphibious end runs along the northern coast. Small forces would be landed behind German lines to force withdrawals and keep the road open. The first landing near Sant'Agata on August 8th helped turn a German defensive line. The second, at Brolo on August 11th, was far more dangerous. Colonel Lyle Bernard's battalion landed behind enemy positions and nearly got swallowed before relief came through. It was bold, it was costly, and it fit Patton's logic perfectly. Risk the edge, keep the pace, reach the city first. If those end runs had failed completely, the story might have reversed. A trapped American battalion, a stalled coastal advance, a Montgomery entrance into Messina before Patton's men could arrive. One failed landing could have turned Patton's race into proof of recklessness. But the landings did just enough. They pulled German lines loose. They kept the Americans moving, and by mid-August the campaign was entering its final hour. On August 16th, another landing near Spadafora helped tighten the American approach. German resistance was thinning, not because the enemy had been destroyed, but because the evacuation was almost complete. Hube's withdrawal across the Strait would become one of the most successful tactical evacuations of the European war. More than 100,000 troops escaped. Thousands of vehicles crossed, tanks, guns, and equipment went with them. That fact would haunt the victory. But at dawn on August 17th, the cameras did not see the evacuation first. They saw Americans entering Messina. Forward elements of Truscott's 3rd Infantry Division entered the city before sunrise. By early morning, the prized city of Sicily was in American hands. Patton arrived later that morning wearing the polished image he knew how to stage. Helmet, boots, command presence. Victory made visible. Montgomery came after him, and for a commander who understood theater as well as Patton did, arriving second was its own defeat. The British 8th Army had fought hard. Montgomery's troops had not failed from lack of courage. They had been slowed by terrain, resistance, command priorities, and the shape of the island itself. But public memory is brutal. It remembers who entered first, and on August 17, 1943, that man was Patton now, returned to Churchill. Churchill had not imagined Sicily as an American coming-out party. He had built the campaign around a British strategic vision. He had expected the Mediterranean argument to strengthen Britain's voice inside the alliance. He had expected Montgomery, the symbol of British recovery after North Africa, to carry the decisive image. Instead, the world saw something else. An American army that had looked inexperienced at Kasserine Pass in February had learned with frightening speed by August. 6 months earlier, the U.S. Army had been embarrassed. Now it had crossed Sicily faster than the British command expected, taken Palermo, pivoted east, and entered Messina first. That did not mean the Americans were better in every way. It meant they were no longer safely containable inside a supporting role, and Churchill understood the difference. Publicly, he could praise Allied unity. He could acknowledge American performance. He could speak in the careful language of coalition victory. Privately, the arithmetic had changed. Every future argument between London and Washington would carry the memory of Sicily. Who commands? Which theater matters? Whose timetable controls the war? Who gets to decide what victory is supposed to look like? Before Messina, Churchill could still present Britain as the senior strategic mind of the Western Alliance. After Messina, that claim had to share the room with American operational power, and the consequences of Sicily spread far beyond the island. On July 24th, while the fighting was still underway, King Victor Emmanuel III removed Benito Mussolini from power. Pietro Badoglio replaced him, and Italy began secret talks with the Allies. The political shock Churchill had wanted was real. Sicily helped break the fascist regime. It opened the Mediterranean sea lanes. It forced Hitler to pour German strength into Italy. But the campaign also proved Marshall's deepest fear. Italy would not become the easy road to victory, because the German army that escaped from Sicily did not disappear. It waited on the mainland, at Salerno, at the Volturno, at Cassino, on the long road to Rome. The Allies would pay again for the failure to seal the Strait. The men Hube evacuated helped turn Italy into a grinding campaign of mountains, mud, rivers, and costly advances. So Sicily produced two truths at once. One truth was triumph. The island was taken in 38 days. Mussolini fell. The Mediterranean opened. Allied casualties were heavy, more than 20,000 across American, British, and Canadian forces. But the strategic prize was real. The other truth was unfinished business. The Axis lost Sicily, but Germany saved much of its force. Messina fell, but the trap did not close. The victory carried a shadow, and for Patton even the triumph came with a shadow of its own. During the campaign, he had struck 2 hospitalized soldiers he believed were avoiding combat. Eisenhower considered the incident severe enough to demand formal apologies. When the story reached the American public months later, outrage threatened Patton's career. The man who had won the race to Messina was sidelined before the next great invasion. He would not command in Normandy on D-Day. That, too, became part of the irony. Patton proved America could move with terrifying speed. Then he was forced to wait. But the larger message had already been delivered. The Sicily campaign began as Churchill's Mediterranean argument. It began with British strategy, British command prestige, and the assumption that Montgomery's army would provide the campaign's defining image. It ended with American troops in Messina first. It ended with Patton standing in the city that had been meant to complete someone else's story. And it ended with Churchill facing a truth no telephone call could soften. The United States Army was no longer just learning the war under British guidance. It was beginning to write the war in its own hand. Churchill built Sicily to prove Britain could still lead the Allied road into Europe. Patton reached Messina first and put America's signature on the map.